The cold wind bit through John's worn coat as he sat against the wall of a downtown New York building. It was just past noon, and the city was as bustling as ever, but to John, it felt like he was invisible. The world passed by without a glance, and he was nothing but another forgotten soul on the streets. He watched the people around him, well-dressed, confident, and seemingly full of purpose. Their steps quickened as they moved from place to place, too absorbed in their own lives to notice someone like him. The smell of hot dogs and pretzels from the vendors on the corner drifted over, only making his stomach growl in reminder of how empty it had been for hours. He hadn't eaten since the morning. As he shifted slightly, trying to find a more comfortable position on the cold concrete, he caught sight of a familiar face. It was hard not to notice. Donald Trump. The former president was stepping out of a high-rise building just across the street, flanked by his security team and a few aides. The press was there too, cameras flashing, microphones reaching toward him. John had always known Trump's name. He had seen him on TV, in the tabloids, and in the headlines. To some, he was a figure of wealth and power, a man who could change the world with a snap of his fingers. To John, he was just another rich guy, someone too far removed from his world to ever offer help. But today, something felt different. John had been sitting on these same streets for months, each day blurring into the next. The idea of asking for help, let alone from someone like Trump, seemed absurd. But today, his pride had eroded just enough. He needed something, anything, to make it through another night on the cold pavement. Maybe $1. Maybe just a moment of kindness. As Trump passed by, John felt a surge of energy, like a spark igniting something deep inside him. Without thinking, he stood up and walked towards Trump, his shoes clicking against the sidewalk. His hand was trembling, but he extended it, his voice barely a whisper as he said, "Can you give me $1?" Trump stopped in his tracks. The crowd fell silent. The cameras were still rolling. Everyone was watching. John's heart skipped a beat. This was either going to be the most embarrassing moment of his life or something he would never forget. Trump's gaze shifted from the cameras to John. For a moment, it seemed like the world paused. The businessman, the public figure, the polarizing leader, all looked down at the man asking for $1. And then, to everyone's shock, Trump did something no one expected. Instead of turning away, ignoring John like countless others had, Trump smiled. It wasn't the usual smirk he wore during speeches or rallies. It was genuine, unexpected, warm even. He leaned in, and with a chuckle, he said, $1 won't do. But how about I help you in a bigger way? John's mind raced. Was he hearing this right? Trump wasn't just brushing him off. No, this wasn't some publicity stunt or joke. This was something different. And for the first time in a long while, John felt a glimmer of hope. The people watching were stunned, and so was John. Was this some kind of trick? Or was it really happening? Before John could react, Trump added, "Let's talk. I think I can help you turn things around." The crowd erupted in whispers and murmurs. Phones were already out, and the moment was being shared across the internet. The encounter, so simple yet so profound, was about to change both of their lives in ways they could never predict. John was speechless, unsure of what to say next. He had asked for $1, but it looked like he was about to get something much more significant. As Trump gestured toward his car, motioning for John to follow him, John couldn't help but wonder, what was going to happen next? This wasn't just an ordinary day on the streets. This was something far bigger, something that no one, not even John, could have ever imagined. As John climbed into the back seat of the black SUV, his heart raced. He tried to steady his breathing, but it was hard to focus. He had never been in a car like this, never mind with someone like Trump. His mind, still spinning from the surprise of the encounter, began to race through his past. The years of mistakes, pain, and regret that had brought him here. John wasn't always homeless. He had once been a proud man with a future, someone who had dreams and plans. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, he was the kind of kid who worked hard. His parents were hardworking folks, struggling to make ends meet, but they had a strong sense of family and instilled in him the value of a good job, a steady income, and a strong work ethic. John had taken that lesson to heart. He had gotten a decent job out of high school working in construction, and over time, He saved up enough to rent an apartment. Life wasn't perfect, but it was enough. That was until everything started to unravel. The first blow came when he lost his job. The construction company he worked for went under, caught in the financial downturn of the mid-2000s. John had tried to get another job, but the market was tough, and there were always younger, cheaper workers willing to take what they could get. His savings dwindled, and soon, he was unable to pay rent. The bills piled up, and eventually, he was forced to leave his apartment. John spent the next few years moving from one temporary shelter to another, trying to hold on to his dignity, but it was slipping away fast. He felt the weight of failure pressing down on him as the rejection letters piled up in his makeshift shelters. His addiction to alcohol started to get worse. What began as a way to numb the pain turned into a crutch that slowly eroded his health, his relationships, and his sense of self-worth. He lost touch with his family. His mother passed away while he was still on the streets, and he wasn't there to say goodbye. His father, once his biggest supporter, stopped answering his calls. His friends had all moved on, some too far away to help, others too distant in their own lives to even think about someone like John. By the time he made it to New York City, the last vestiges of his pride were gone. He had lived on the streets for nearly 2 years, watching as the world moved forward, leaving him behind. The homeless shelters, the soup kitchens, the kindness of strangers, they weren't enough to fix the hole inside him. His past kept haunting him, and he couldn't see a way out. He wasn't even sure he wanted to try anymore. But now, sitting in the back of Trump's SUV, everything seemed surreal. This wasn't supposed to happen. People like him didn't get chances like this. And yet, here he was, heading toward a new life. Or at least, that's what Trump had promised him. Trump glanced over his shoulder at John, interrupting his thoughts. "I know what you're thinking," Trump said with a slight smile. "You're wondering why I'm doing this. Trust me, I'm not doing this for a photo op." John nodded, unsure what to say. He was still processing the fact that Trump, a billionaire former president, had offered to help him. What did it even mean? Was this for real, or was he just part of some crazy stunt? "I've seen a lot of people struggle," Trump continued. "I know what it's like to fall. The difference is, I've had a lot of people help me along the way when I needed it the most. And I'm in a position to help others. Don't let your past define you. The future's still wide open, you know?" John listened closely, trying to keep the tears from welling up in his eyes. The future's still wide open. For the first time in years, someone had looked at him and not just seen a homeless man. They had seen the possibility of a future, a person who could rise again. The weight of his past hadn't been erased in that moment, but for the first time, it felt lighter. As the SUV turned down a side street, Trump turned his attention back to the road. "I know this isn't going to be easy for you," he said, "but nothing worth doing ever is. We'll figure it out. We'll get you a place to stay, a job, maybe even a little money to get you back on your feet. The point is, I want to see you succeed. You're not the first person who's been down on their luck, and you won't be the last. But I think you have what it takes." John sat there in silence, letting Trump's words settle in. Could he really change? Could he really leave this life behind? The car pulled up in front of a small, upscale building. Trump turned back to him with a reassuring look. "Let's start by getting you some rest. We'll talk more later. And don't worry, we'll make sure you have everything you need." John's eyes welled up with gratitude, but he quickly wiped the tears away. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had a chance. As he stepped out of the car, John paused, looking back at Trump. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice cracking. Trump gave him a brief nod before turning back to the building. "It's nothing. Just get ready to work. You've got a long road ahead." John didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. He was no longer invisible. John's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped into the small, upscale building. It wasn't much, just a modest lobby with a few cushioned chairs and a receptionist behind a desk. But to John, it felt like he was walking into another world. A world he had never even imagined could be within his reach. He was led down a hallway by one of Trump's staff members, a sharply dressed young woman who introduced herself as Lisa. The walls were adorned with sleek, modern art, and the soft hum of the air conditioning was the only sound in the otherwise quiet space. Lisa was polite, but there was an air of professionalism that made it clear she wasn't here to engage in casual conversation. This wasn't a charity. This was business. "We'll get you set up in a room," Lisa said, pushing open a door that led into a small, clean apartment. It wasn't luxurious, but it was more than John had had in years. It had a comfortable bed, a small kitchenette, and a bathroom with fresh towels. It smelled of lavender and cleanliness, a stark contrast to the streets he had grown used to. "Take a moment to settle in," Lisa added. "We'll be back in a few hours to talk about next steps." John didn't know how to react. He stood there for a few seconds, unable to move, almost afraid that if he did, the illusion would shatter. But he finally forced himself to walk to the bed, sitting down slowly. His fingers ran over the soft blanket. He hadn't felt something this comforting in so long. His mind was racing. What do I do now? The idea that someone, especially someone as powerful as Trump, was offering him a way out seemed impossible. He had been given so little hope over the years that it was hard to believe this would last. But this was the opportunity he'd been waiting for. The chance to rebuild, to make something of himself again. And he couldn't afford to waste it. As John lay down on the bed, the thoughts of his past crept back in. His childhood, his parents, the work he had lost. All of it felt so far away, like a different lifetime. But the shadow of his failures lingered. His addiction still tugged at him, the memories of his worst moments haunting him. Could he really change? Could he really leave all of that behind? Just then, there was a knock on the door. Lisa entered with a clipboard in hand. "We've arranged for a few things," she said, looking at John. "We have a counselor lined up to talk to you about your situation and some options for job training. We'll also help you with any paperwork you need to get back on your feet. But it's up to you to make the most of this opportunity." John nodded. "I understand. I'll try my best." Lisa gave him a slight smile. "Good. We believe you can do it." After she left, John felt a strange mixture of emotions, nervousness, excitement, but also an overwhelming sense of guilt. This was too good to be true. Was he really worthy of this second chance? He thought about his past mistakes, the years wasted on the streets, and wondered if he could ever truly escape his history. A few hours later, a man named David, a counselor who worked with the organization Trump had arranged, arrived at the apartment. David was middle-aged, with kind eyes and a calm demeanor. He wasted no time, asking John to sit with him as they began discussing his past. "Tell me about yourself, John," David said gently, settling into the chair across from him. "What brought you to New York?" John hesitated. He had told himself so many times that his story didn't matter, that it was just the way life had gone. But now, with someone who seemed to genuinely care, the words spilled out before he could stop them. "I lost my job, lost my home, and then I just gave up." His voice broke as he spoke. "I drank to forget, but it never worked. I'm just tired." David nodded in understanding. "I hear you, John. It's easy to get stuck in that cycle. But the first step is recognizing that you don't have to stay stuck. This is a fresh start, and you can take it one step at a time." The conversation went on for hours, and as the evening wore on, John started to feel the weight of his old life lifting. For the first time in years, he felt like he had the power to change. But the reality of the situation began to sink in, and with it came the fear of failure. This wasn't going to be easy. As he lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, John's thoughts turned to Trump. Was this really about helping him, or was there something more to it? John had heard the rumors, the media circus, the criticism, the lavish lifestyle, but he had also seen something in Trump's eyes earlier that day. A kind of determination, an unspoken promise that maybe, just maybe, he could help turn John's life around. The next morning, John was woken up by a knock at the door. A staff member handed him a fresh set of clothes, simple but new, and a stack of forms to fill out for a job placement program. As he dressed, he felt a strange mix of nervousness and hope. This was it. This was the first day of the rest of his life. But as he stood in front of the mirror, ready to step out into a new world, John couldn't shake the doubt in his mind. What if I fail? He took a deep breath, exhaled, and forced himself to face the future. He had nothing to lose. This was his chance. John's hands shook as he filled out the forms. The crisp paper crinkled under his fingers, a reminder of how foreign everything felt. In his old life, he had never needed to rely on such things. Applications, assistance programs, people telling him what steps to take next. He had always been independent, or so he thought. But now, every task seemed like an uphill battle, a challenge that required him to confront not just his past, but his very sense of self. He had been told that a job placement would be arranged for him, but there was a nagging thought in his mind. What if I mess this up? What if I can't keep up with the others? The morning passed in a blur. Lisa had checked in on him earlier to ensure he was comfortable, offering words of encouragement. "Don't worry about everything at once, John," she had said. "It's about taking one step at a time. Just show up, and we'll do the rest." But showing up was the easy part. As John walked out of the apartment building later that afternoon, a strange weight hung in the air. He was headed to a small job training facility, a program designed to teach basic skills and help people like him find stable work. The thought of walking through that door made his stomach twist with anxiety. He hadn't worked in years, and now he was about to face a world that had left him behind. Would he even be able to understand the lessons? Could he learn the new skills they were offering? As he stood in front of the building, John took a deep breath and forced his feet forward. He told himself that this was the beginning of something better. The door was heavy, and his fingers trembled slightly as he pushed it open. Inside, there was a small reception area, and a woman behind the desk greeted him with a warm smile. "You must be John," she said. "Welcome. We're so glad you're here." John nodded, feeling suddenly small. "Thanks," he muttered. She handed him a packet of materials and directed him toward a classroom in the back. As he walked down the hallway, he heard muffled voices. Other people, most likely in the same boat as him, struggling to regain their footing. The nervous energy was palpable. John wasn't alone in his doubts. The classroom was small but functional, with a whiteboard at the front and rows of chairs for the students. A few others were already seated. They looked like ordinary people, men and women of all ages, some older than John, others younger. Some had worn clothing, others wore business casual attire. It was a mix of backgrounds, but they all had one thing in common. They were here for a second chance. John took a seat near the back and tried not to draw attention to himself. He wasn't sure what to expect. A few minutes passed before the instructor, a man named Robert, walked into the room. He was in his early 40s, with a calm demeanor that made him approachable. "All right, everyone. Let's get started," Robert said, glancing around the room. "We're going to start with some basic computer skills today. Don't worry if you've never used one before. We're here to help you." John's heart sank. Computer skills? He had never been good with technology. He had barely used a computer during his old life, and now he was supposed to learn everything from scratch? He glanced around at the others. Some of them seemed to have experience with computers, typing away effortlessly on the keyboards, while John fumbled with the mouse, unsure of where to click. He felt embarrassed, his face flushing. He was falling behind already. Robert noticed John's discomfort and walked over to his desk. "Need help, John?" he asked kindly. John nodded, his throat tight. "I'm not sure I can do this. I haven't used a computer in a long time." Robert smiled reassuringly. "It's okay. We all start somewhere. Just take your time." The instructor patiently walked him through the basic steps: how to navigate the computer, open a browser, and use simple programs. It was slow at first, and John felt frustrated. But Robert's calm presence helped. Slowly, he began to get the hang of it. Each new click, each new command, was a small victory, and it gave him just enough confidence to move forward. By the end of the class, John was feeling a little more at ease. It wasn't perfect, but he had made progress. For the first time in years, he felt like he was capable of learning again. But the real test came after the class ended. Robert gathered everyone at the front of the room and gave them a task. Each person was to prepare a resume based on the skills they had learned. John's heart pounded again. A resume. He had no idea how to start. His last job had been over 5 years ago, and that was just construction work. What could he possibly put on a resume now? He had nothing to show for the years he'd spent lost on the streets. But he couldn't back down. Not this time. He took a deep breath and began typing. It was awkward at first. He stumbled over words, questioning every line he wrote. But as the minutes passed, he started to find a rhythm. His past experiences, his willingness to learn, his determination. He began to see how they could be valuable, even if they weren't what he had originally envisioned. The clock ticked down, and when it was time to turn in his resume, John felt a strange sense of accomplishment. It wasn't perfect, but it was his, and it was a start. Later that night, as he returned to the apartment, he was mentally exhausted, but he also felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could do this. He could turn his life around, piece by piece. But the nagging doubt still lingered in the back of his mind. What if it wasn't enough? What if he wasn't good enough? As John lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he thought about the day's lessons, the people he had met, and the unexpected kindness he had received from Trump. Could he live up to this chance? Could he really change his life? The road ahead was long and uncertain. But John knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to give up without a fight. The next few days felt like a blur. John was thrust into the routine of learning, adapting, and trying to shake off the ghosts of his past. Each day, he woke up early, donned the clothes provided by the program, and headed to the training facility, where he pushed himself to keep up with the lessons. The computers were still a struggle, but John had begun to get the hang of them. His resume was now complete, and he felt a sense of pride as he looked at the document. It wasn't much, just a simple summary of skills he had picked up in a short time, but it was his first real step toward regaining some sense of dignity. On the morning of the 5th day, after a long class about basic office management, John found himself sitting in the cafeteria, eating his lunch alone. His mind wandered back to the time before he had met Trump, before he had even thought about turning his life around. In those days, he had been consumed by his own failures and regrets, letting the past define him. But now, he was starting to see a different path. The uncertainty was still there, but so was the glimmer of hope. Just as he was finishing his sandwich, Lisa walked in. She had been checking in on him from time to time, offering support and guidance. But today, there was something different in her demeanor, a quiet excitement in her eyes. "John," she said, her voice tinged with anticipation, "I've got some news for you. Trump's office has arranged an interview for you." John blinked, not quite sure if he had heard correctly. An interview? For what? Lisa smiled. A job. It's with one of the companies he's partnered with for this program. They're looking for someone with your skills, someone who's committed and willing to learn. This is your shot. John felt a rush of disbelief flood through him. A job interview. It was the opportunity he had been working toward, the moment that could change everything. But along with the excitement came fear. What if he wasn't ready? What if he messed it up? He tried to suppress the anxiety welling up inside him. I don't know if I'm ready for this. I've only been learning for a few days." "John," Lisa interrupted gently, "you've been doing great. You're more ready than you think. You've got the skills now, and you have the determination. All you need is to believe in yourself." Her words hit harder than he expected. He hadn't been thinking about it in those terms. The truth was, he had spent so many years doubting his abilities that the idea of success felt almost foreign. But Lisa's confidence in him was contagious. Maybe he did have a shot. "Okay," he said, his voice shaky but determined. "I'll do it." The interview was scheduled for the next morning. John spent the rest of the afternoon preparing, going over his resume and practicing his answers to potential questions. He knew he didn't have all the answers, but he also knew he had something that mattered, the will to make it. The next morning, John stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his shirt. He had borrowed a blazer from the program's clothing section, and for the first time in a long while, he felt like he looked the part. The reflection staring back at him was unfamiliar. It wasn't the disheveled man who had wandered the streets of New York just a week ago. This was someone else, someone with a chance to prove himself. As he arrived at the office for the interview, John's nerves kicked in. The lobby was sleek and modern, with polished floors and glass walls. It felt like a different world, one that he wasn't sure he belonged in. He swallowed hard and took a seat, trying to steady his breathing. The interview was set to be with a hiring manager from one of Trump's partner companies, an opportunity John couldn't afford to waste. A few minutes later, he was called into the office. The hiring manager, a middle-aged woman named Karen, greeted him with a warm smile and a firm handshake. John, it's good to meet you, she said, motioning for him to sit. I understand you've come through a special program. I've heard good things about you. John felt a mix of pride and anxiety. Thank you, he said quietly. I'm just trying to make the most of the chance I've been given. Karen nodded, her expression thoughtful. That's what we like to hear. Now, let's talk a little bit about your background. I see you've been working on basic office skills. What other skills do you bring to the table? John took a deep breath. It was time to sell himself, even if he didn't entirely believe in what he was saying. Well, I've done construction work before, and I'm good with my hands. I'm also a quick learner. I know how to work hard, and I'm dedicated to getting the job done. Karen seemed impressed. That's great. We need people who are reliable and ready to learn. I'm confident you'll be a good fit for our team. We'll be in touch soon with our decision. John stood up, shaking her hand again. Thank you for this opportunity. As he left the office, a wave of relief washed over him. He had made it through the interview. It wasn't perfect, but he had shown up, and that was what mattered. Now, all he could do was wait. But even as he walked back to the apartment, he knew that something had shifted inside him. The fear and uncertainty hadn't completely vanished, but he had faced it. For the first time in years, he believed he was capable of more than just surviving. Later that night, as John lay in bed, he thought back to Trump's initial offer, the simple question, "Can you give me $1?" What had seemed like a small act of charity at the time had now become something far more profound. It was the beginning of a chance for redemption, not just financially, but in every sense of the word. And as he drifted off to sleep, John realized something important. This wasn't just about the money. It was about rebuilding, about proving to himself that he could start again. Tomorrow, he would know if he had made it. But regardless of the outcome, he had already won something far greater, a belief in himself that he hadn't had in years. The days after the interview felt like an eternity. Every time John checked his phone, his heart raced with hope and dread, waiting for a call that could change everything. But there was nothing. No voicemail. No email. Just silence. As the hours dragged on, John's mind began to spiral. Was it over? Had they rejected him? Maybe he wasn't ready after all. Maybe he had failed again. But then, on the fourth day after the interview, as he sat at his makeshift desk in the apartment, his phone buzzed. He froze. It was a call from an unknown number. His heart skipped a beat. He swallowed hard, his fingers trembling as he answered the phone. "Hello?" he said, his voice tight with anticipation. "Hi, is this John?" a voice on the other end asked. "Yes, this is John," he replied, barely able to keep his voice steady. "This is Karen from the office. I wanted to personally congratulate you. We've decided to offer you the position." John felt his legs go weak. He gripped the desk to steady himself, his pulse hammering in his chest. The words didn't seem real. It was happening. After everything, his struggle, the doubt, the fear, it had finally paid off. "You've done great in the program, and we think you'll be a valuable asset to the team. Are you ready to start?" Karen's voice was warm, but there was an underlying professionalism in her tone. I'm ready," John managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you. Thank you so much." He hung up the phone, staring at it for a long moment, as if trying to comprehend what had just happened. The weight of the call hadn't fully sunk in. He had a job, a real job, the kind that came with a paycheck, responsibilities, and, for the first time in years, a sense of purpose. He sat back in the chair, his thoughts racing. The journey was far from over, but this was a huge step forward. There was no turning back now. He had a chance to build something real. He wasn't just a homeless man anymore. He was a man with a future. Later that afternoon, John met with Lisa, who had been a constant source of support throughout his time in the program. Her face lit up when she heard the news. She had believed in him when he had doubted himself, and now, that belief had paid off. "I knew you could do it," she said with a proud smile. "You've come so far, John. This is just the beginning." John smiled back, feeling a rush of gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Lisa. You've been there every step of the way." She shrugged modestly. "I just gave you the tools. You did all the hard work. But this is your victory." That night, John sat on the edge of his bed, reflecting on the journey he had made. The man he had been, angry, lost, and desperate, seemed like a distant memory now. The man he was becoming felt like a stranger, someone he wasn't sure he recognized but desperately wanted to be. The world outside the apartment window seemed to hum with possibilities. He had a chance to start over, to rebuild his life piece by piece. And it wasn't just about a job. It was about restoring his self-worth. It was about showing himself and the world that he was capable of more than just surviving. He could thrive. As he lay back on the bed, John thought about the strange series of events that had brought him here. The chance encounter with Trump, the question that had started it all. "Can you give me $1?" It had felt insignificant at the time, just a simple request. But it had set in motion something far greater. Trump's offer of help had been more than just an opportunity for money. It had been a lifeline. It had reminded John that there were people who still cared, people who believed in the possibility of change. And that belief had sparked a fire inside him. John closed his eyes and thought about the road ahead. There would still be challenges, and there would still be setbacks. But for the first time in years, he felt ready to face them. Tomorrow would be his first day at the new job. And for the first time in a long time, John was no longer afraid of the future. He was excited. The next chapter of his life was just beginning, and he was determined to make it count. He wasn't just going to survive anymore. He was going to live. As the story of John's transformation unfolded, it became clear that the most significant change wasn't just about getting a job. It was about reclaiming his life, his dignity, and his sense of self-worth. The journey from homelessness to employment wasn't easy, and there were many obstacles along the way. But through it all, John discovered that the power to change his life lay not in the circumstances around him, but in his own willingness to take a chance. From the moment Trump offered him that $1 to the days he spent doubting himself, John had been given a gift, the chance to rewrite his story. It was a reminder that no matter how dire the situation may seem, there is always room for hope. There is always a way forward, even when the path ahead seems uncertain. Through his struggle, John learned that the true value of life isn't measured by what you've lost or what you've endured. It's about what you're willing to fight for. And in the end, the most important thing wasn't the job, the money, or the recognition. It was the belief that he could still make a difference in his own life. As John stepped into his new future, he wasn't just a man with a job. He was a man who had rediscovered his own potential. And that, more than anything else, was worth more than all the dollars in the world. John woke up early the next morning, his nerves buzzing with anticipation. Today was the first day of his new job. For years, he had struggled with uncertainty and fear. But now, the future seemed like a puzzle he could finally start to put together. He took a deep breath, gathered his things, and headed out. The job was at a local office, an entry-level position with potential for growth, and it felt surreal. As he walked to the office, he passed by familiar spots. The corner where he used to beg for change, the bench he had sat on for hours, lost in his thoughts. Everything felt different now. He wasn't walking past them as a man without a future. He was walking past them as someone who was rebuilding his life. The office building was sleek, modern, with glass doors and clean lines. John stepped inside, his heart thumping with excitement. The receptionist, a young woman with a friendly smile, greeted him warmly. "You must be John. We've been expecting you." John nodded, his voice a little unsteady. "Yes, that's me." She handed him a badge and gestured for him to follow. "Let me show you to your desk." As they walked through the open-plan office, John's nerves grew. He had never worked in a corporate environment before, and everything felt foreign. The computers, the jargon, the pace. But despite his discomfort, there was a sense of pride growing within him. He was here. He was part of something. His desk was simple but functional. A computer, a stack of papers, and a phone sat in front of him. It wasn't much, but to John, it was everything. This was his opportunity to prove that he could succeed, not just to others, but to himself. Throughout the day, he kept his head down, focused on his tasks. He didn't have to know everything right away, and he made a point of asking questions when he didn't understand something. He could feel the eyes of his coworkers on him, but he didn't mind. This was part of the process. He was learning. He was growing. At lunch, Lisa called him. She had been his mentor throughout the program, and her words had been a constant source of encouragement. "How's your first day going?" she asked, her voice cheerful. It's overwhelming," John admitted. "There's so much to learn, and everything's moving so fast. But I'm doing my best." Lisa's laugh was warm and reassuring. "You're doing great, John. It's normal to feel that way. Just take it one step at a time. And remember, you've got this." John smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude toward her. She had been there when he needed guidance, when he felt lost and unsure. She had been a reminder that he didn't have to go through this alone. After hanging up, he returned to his desk, feeling more grounded. He had made it this far, and he was going to keep pushing forward. Every small victory, understanding a new system, completing a task, even just asking for help, was another step in his journey. As the days went by, John settled into the rhythm of his new life. The work wasn't easy, but it was meaningful. He found himself connecting with his coworkers, many of whom had their own stories of struggle and perseverance. Slowly, but surely, he began to realize that he wasn't the only one who had overcome obstacles to get here. One afternoon, as he was leaving the office, he ran into Karen, the hiring manager who had interviewed him. She gave him a warm smile. "John, how's everything going?" she asked. "I'm learning a lot," he said, a sense of pride in his voice. "It's been tough, but I'm sticking with it." "I'm glad to hear that," Karen replied. "You're doing great. Keep up the good work." As John walked out into the cool evening air, he couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. He had found his place. This was no longer just a job. It was a foundation, a chance to build something real. That night, as he lay in bed, John reflected on the past few months. He had come so far from the man who had wandered the streets of New York, unsure of where his next meal would come from. He had been given a second chance, and he was determined to make it count. But the road ahead wasn't going to be without its challenges. There would be days when he felt overwhelmed, days when he doubted himself. There would be setbacks and obstacles. But John knew one thing for sure. He wasn't the same man who had once begged for $1. He had proven that he could change, that he could rebuild his life, and that he was worthy of success. The next morning, as he prepared for work, John felt a quiet sense of confidence. He wasn't perfect, and there was still much to learn, but he was on the right path. And that was enough for him. One step at a time, he was building the life he had always dreamed of, a life of stability, dignity, and purpose. And no matter what happened next, John knew he had already won. The journey from homelessness to a new beginning wasn't just about getting a job. It was about reclaiming his life. And that, he realized, was worth more than anything. John's story is a testament to the power of second chances. It's easy to forget that, no matter how low we may fall, we always have the ability to rise again. John's transformation didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't always easy. But through hard work, perseverance, and a little bit of luck, he turned his life around. The key to his success wasn't just the job or the money. It was his belief in himself. After years of doubting his worth, John found the strength to take a chance on himself. And through that, he discovered that the path to redemption is built one step at a time. For anyone who finds themselves struggling, John's story serves as a reminder that change is always possible. The past may shape who we are, but it doesn't define who we can become. And with the right support and determination, we can all find our way to a brighter future. Just like John, we all have the power to rebuild, to transform, and to become the person we were always meant to be. As weeks passed, John settled into his routine. The job was becoming more familiar, and he began to feel a growing sense of comfort in his role. But with that comfort came new challenges, ones he hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just about learning new tasks and fitting into the office culture. The emotional weight of his transformation, of moving forward from his past, was starting to catch up with him. One Tuesday afternoon, John found himself sitting in front of his computer, staring blankly at the screen. He had a deadline to meet, but the numbers in front of him blurred together. His mind wandered. He thought about the streets, how cold they had felt, how lonely, how easy it had been to fall into despair when he had nothing to hold on to. The overwhelming thought that kept gnawing at him was this: was he really cut out for this? Was he really capable of staying on this path? The fear that had once paralyzed him crept back into his thoughts. Lisa had warned him that the road wouldn't be easy. She had told him there would be moments of doubt, moments where he'd question if he was good enough. He hadn't realized how true that would be until now. He leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his hair. His phone buzzed. It was a text message from Lisa. "How's everything going, John? Anything on your mind?" John stared at the message for a long time. His fingers hovered over the keys, but he hesitated. He didn't want to admit that he was struggling again, that he was losing confidence in himself. But then he remembered what she had told him. Don't be afraid to ask for help. He typed out a quick response. "I'm okay, but I'm having a hard time keeping up with everything. I don't know if I'm cut out for this job." There was a brief pause before Lisa replied. "John, listen to me. You are more than capable. You've already proven that. The challenges you're facing now are just part of the process. It's okay to feel overwhelmed, but you need to trust that you can do this. Remember what you've already accomplished." John read the message again, letting the words sink in. He wasn't alone in this. He wasn't the only one who had struggled. Lisa had been through her own battles, and she understood the weight of what he was going through. Her belief in him, her support, was a lifeline. Taking a deep breath, John got back to work. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments where he questioned his abilities, but he was learning to push through. Slowly, he began to regain his focus. He broke the task into smaller steps, allowing himself to tackle one piece at a time. And, little by little, the numbers on the screen started to make sense again. By the time the workday ended, he had completed the task. It wasn't perfect, but it was done, and that, for now, was enough. That evening, John sat at his small kitchen table, reflecting on the day. His mind wasn't racing as much as it had been earlier. He had faced the doubt, the uncertainty, and had come out on the other side. But it wasn't just about the work. It was about his growth, his ability to keep going despite the doubts that still lingered in his mind. The truth was, the road to rebuilding his life wasn't linear. There would be days when things seemed to fall into place effortlessly, and there would be days when everything felt like it was falling apart. But each day, each challenge, was a lesson. John was learning that patience wasn't just about waiting. It was about trusting himself to keep moving forward, even when the path wasn't clear. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from his sister, Emily. "How's the job going, John? I'm so proud of you." He smiled and typed a quick response. "It's going well. It's hard sometimes, but I'm making it through." He paused before sending the message, reflecting on the words. It wasn't just about making it through. It was about thriving. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was becoming someone he could be proud of. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in years, he felt like he had the strength to walk it. In the days that followed, John began to realize that his journey wasn't just about facing the challenges in his present life. It was also about addressing the past he had left behind, the relationships that had been strained or broken during his darkest days. One evening, as he sat in his apartment, John received a phone call from his mother. The sound of her voice was both comforting and unsettling, as if a part of him was still unsure if he could ever repair the damage done during the years of his addiction and homelessness. "John," her voice cracked slightly, "I've been thinking about you a lot lately." John had avoided calling her for months. He wasn't sure if he was ready to confront everything he had put her through. But now, hearing her voice, he knew it was time. He took a deep breath and tried to steady his emotions. "I've been thinking about you too, Mom," he said, his voice quieter than usual. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, a silence that spoke volumes. When she finally spoke again, her words were filled with a mixture of hope and regret. "I don't know what to say, John. I'm just so sorry for everything. I should have been there more. I should have done more for you. I didn't know how to help." John's chest tightened as he listened to her words. He could feel the weight of their shared history, the arguments, the disappointments, the years of silence. But now, with the new life he was trying to build, he felt something he hadn't in a long time: forgiveness. "Mom," he said softly, "I know you did the best you could, and I'm sorry, too. I didn't make it easy." Tears welled up in his eyes as he spoke, not because he was angry, but because he felt a deep sense of release. For so long, he had carried resentment and guilt in his heart, unsure if he would ever be able to forgive himself or anyone else. But now, talking to his mother, he realized that forgiveness wasn't just for her. It was for him too. "I want to try to make things right," he continued. "Not just for you, but for me too. I'm not perfect, and I still have a long way to go, but I'm trying." His mother's voice softened. "I know you are, John. I'm so proud of you, and I'll always be here for you, no matter what." John felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time in years, he felt truly seen, truly heard. He didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, he knew that healing was possible. The conversation ended with promises to stay in touch, to rebuild what had been broken. John didn't know how long it would take to mend his relationship with his mother, but he was willing to try. As he hung up the phone, he realized that the journey to rebuilding his life wasn't just about securing a job or finding financial stability. It was about healing the wounds that had shaped him, reconnecting with the people who mattered, and forgiving himself for the mistakes of the past. The road ahead was long, but for the first time, John felt like he had the strength to face it. And he knew that with each step forward, he was becoming the man he was meant to be. John had learned an important lesson in the weeks since his first day at work, that true success wasn't measured by external accomplishments alone, but by the inner peace that came with accepting oneself. It wasn't the paycheck, the recognition, or the job title that made him feel proud. It was the sense of self-worth that came from pushing through every challenge, no matter how small. And as he stood in front of his bathroom mirror one morning, looking at the man he had become, he smiled. He had made it. He was on his way, and that was enough. Just as things began to settle into a new rhythm, John was reminded that life often throws curveballs when you least expect it. It had been a month since his conversation with his mother, and his days at the office were becoming more routine. But that morning, something was different. He awoke to the sound of his phone buzzing on the nightstand. It was an email from work, an unexpected notification that immediately made his stomach drop. As he read through the message, his heart pounded. The company was undergoing restructuring, and they were making cuts. John's position was now at risk. His mind raced. Could he really lose this job? Could everything he'd worked for crumble in an instant? John had worked so hard to get to this point, and the thought of losing it all felt unbearable. The fear of failure clawed at him. He'd spent so much time rebuilding his life after years of struggle, but now he felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff, unsure whether he'd fall or find the courage to keep going. He sat on the edge of his bed for what felt like hours, scrolling through his phone, trying to find any clue about his next steps. His hands trembled as he looked up at the ceiling, trying to steady his breath. It wasn't just about the job, it was about everything he had been through. His mind flashed back to his days on the streets, to the desperation and hopelessness he had felt. The fear of failure was something he had known too well, and it was now threatening to undo everything he had built. But then, as he sat there in the silence of his apartment, John realized something. He had faced worse than this. He had survived the streets. He had learned to fight for his life when everything seemed lost. This job, this new life, wasn't just about the position. It was about the strength he had found within himself. And that strength couldn't be taken away, no matter what happened. With a deep breath, John stood up. He wasn't going to let fear control him. He had come too far, and he wasn't about to give up now. That afternoon, he walked into the office, his nerves still on edge, but his resolve stronger than ever. He met with his supervisor, who reassured him that his position wasn't being eliminated, but it was still a difficult situation. "We're going through some tough times right now, John, but your work has been solid. Keep doing what you're doing, and we'll find a way through this." John nodded, but a part of him couldn't shake the unease that lingered. The uncertainty was still there, hanging in the air like a storm cloud, but he wasn't going to let it consume him. Instead of focusing on what he couldn't control, he chose to focus on the one thing he knew he could, himself. In the days that followed, John threw himself into his work even harder. He showed up early, stayed late, and made sure every task was done to the best of his ability. He knew that, while he couldn't predict the outcome of the company's restructuring, he could control how he responded to it. His coworkers began to notice the difference. They saw his dedication, his focus, and his determination to keep moving forward despite the uncertainty. A few of them, People he had barely spoken to before began offering support. One of his coworkers, Sarah, took him aside one day. "You're really stepping up, John," she said, her voice sincere. "I can see how hard you're working, and I just wanted to say, I respect that." John smiled, grateful for her kind words. It wasn't much, but it meant the world to him. In a world that often felt unstable, these small moments of connection reminded him that he wasn't alone. Later that week, he received a phone call that would change everything. It was from his manager, Karen. "John, I wanted to personally let you know that, after the restructuring, we've decided to keep you on full-time. Your hard work hasn't gone unnoticed, and we believe in what you're doing here." John's heart skipped a beat. He could hardly believe what he was hearing. The relief that washed over him was immense. He had made it through the storm. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was thriving. After the call, he sat back in his chair, taking a moment to process everything. He had faced his fear, pushed through the uncertainty, and come out on the other side. The road ahead still had its challenges, but John felt more confident than ever that he could handle whatever came his way. As John's confidence grew, so did the relationships around him. He had always been a solitary person, keeping to himself during his years of struggle. But now, as he settled into his new life, he began to realize that he didn't have to do everything alone. It started with small interactions, sharing a coffee with Sarah, chatting with a few other coworkers during lunch breaks. The connections that once felt awkward or foreign now began to feel natural. One afternoon, as John sat in the break room, his coworker, Dave, sat down across from him. "Hey, John, I've noticed how much you've been working lately," Dave said, his tone friendly but genuine. "If you ever want to grab a beer after work or talk about anything, I'm here. I know what it's like to go through tough times, and sometimes it helps to have someone listen." John looked at him, surprised by the offer. He wasn't used to this kind of openness, but something about Dave's sincerity resonated with him. He realized that he didn't have to keep everything bottled up inside. "Thanks, Dave. I might take you up on that sometime," John replied, a small but genuine smile spreading across his face. The following week, after a long day at work, John found himself meeting Dave at a local bar. It was a quiet place, nothing fancy, but the comfort of the familiar surroundings made it easier for John to open up. They talked about their work, their pasts, and their hopes for the future. John shared more about his journey, how he had once felt hopeless and lost, and how he had fought to rebuild his life. Dave listened intently, nodding in understanding. "I get it," he said after a moment. "We all have our own struggles. But the fact that you're here, talking about it, shows how far you've come." For the first time in a long time, John felt like he wasn't alone. He had spent so much of his life pushing people away, believing that no one would understand. But here, with Dave, he realized that sometimes the best support comes from the most unexpected places. By the end of the night, John felt lighter, more at peace. His fears didn't disappear, but for the first time, he felt like he had a network, people who cared about him, who saw him not as a failure but as someone who was trying, just like everyone else. And that made all the difference. As John continued to build his new life, he began to feel a deep sense of gratitude for the second chance he had been given. His job, his newfound relationships, and the progress he had made were all steps in the right direction, but he felt that something was still missing. There was a part of him that wanted to do more, to give back to others who were still struggling. One evening, as he was walking home from work, he passed by a homeless shelter he had once been familiar with. A group of people stood outside, talking and laughing, trying to stay warm as the evening grew colder. It was a place he had visited in the past, when he had no other option. Something inside him stirred. He didn't know what he could do, but he knew that he wanted to make a difference. The next day, he reached out to the shelter and offered to volunteer. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As he spent time helping out, talking to people who had been in his shoes, John found a new purpose. He began to realize that his own journey wasn't just about personal success. It was about helping others see that change was possible. He wanted to be a source of hope, just like the people who had helped him when he was at his lowest. Through volunteering, John found a sense of fulfillment he had never expected. His past, once a source of shame, had now become a beacon of strength. He wasn't just a survivor. He was a guide for others, showing them that a better life was possible, no matter how impossible it seemed. As he continued to give back, John's sense of purpose grew stronger. He knew that his journey wasn't over. There would always be challenges, but he had learned that, no matter what, he was capable of facing them. And with each step forward, he was not only rebuilding his life, he was helping others rebuild theirs too. Though John had found a sense of purpose through volunteering, there was still a lingering part of his past that he hadn't fully addressed. The scars from his days on the streets had been buried deep within him, but every so often, memories would rise to the surface, forcing him to confront his pain. One particular afternoon, while John was working at the shelter, he ran into a familiar face. A man he had known from his days on the streets, a man named Sam. Sam had always been a little older than John and had spent years on the streets, just as he had. When their eyes met, Sam's face lit up in recognition. "John?" Sam's voice cracked, a mix of surprise and disbelief in his tone. John froze for a moment, unsure how to respond. It had been years since he had seen Sam. He thought about all the times they had shared a moment of camaraderie, trying to survive together when they had nothing. But now, things were different. John had a job, a life that was finally moving forward. Sam, on the other hand, still looked like he was stuck in the past, his clothes ragged, his eyes weary from years of hardship. John approached him slowly. "Sam, it's been a long time." "I never thought I'd see you again," Sam said, shaking his head in disbelief. "You look different, like you're doing well." "I am," John replied, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. "It's been a tough road, but I've found my way." Sam's eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and sorrow. "I never thought I'd get out of it. But seeing you, man, it gives me hope. Maybe I'm not too far gone after all." For a moment, John didn't know what to say. He had always hoped for this kind of reunion, but the weight of seeing Sam still stuck in the same place he had once been was overwhelming. It reminded him of everything he had fought so hard to escape. After a long silence, John spoke. "Sam, you're not too far gone. It's never too late to change." But Sam's face hardened, a wall going up in his eyes. "You don't get it. It's easy for you. You got out, but I can't seem to shake it. The streets, the drugs, the hopelessness. It's like I'm chained to it. Every time I try to get back on my feet, something drags me down again." John felt a pang of guilt in his chest. He knew the struggle Sam was talking about. He had been there, had felt those chains, that weight. It was so easy to fall back into old habits, to give up when the world seemed to keep pushing you down. "You're not alone in this, Sam," John said gently. "There's no shame in asking for help. You don't have to do this by yourself." Sam looked down, his expression vulnerable for a moment. "I don't know if I have the strength anymore." John placed a hand on his shoulder. "We all need a little help sometimes." "I did. But you've got to want it, man. You've got to fight for it. And I'm here for you. I'll help you however I can." Sam's eyes filled with tears as he looked at John. For the first time in a long while, he seemed to see a glimmer of hope. "Maybe I can try. Maybe I can start over. But I don't know where to begin." "Let's start here," John said, gesturing to the shelter around them. "We'll take it one step at a time. No one has to do this alone." For the first time in a long time, John felt like he was truly living his purpose, not just surviving, but making a real difference in someone else's life. He had once been in Sam's shoes, feeling lost and hopeless, but now he was a source of strength. As Sam nodded, the faintest trace of a smile on his face, John realized that he wasn't just helping Sam. He was reminding himself of how far he had come and how much further he could go. In the weeks that followed, John continued to volunteer at the shelter, but now he also spent a lot of his free time helping Sam. He wasn't sure what it would take for Sam to truly break free of his past, but he wasn't going to let his old friends slip through the cracks. Every day, they met for coffee, talked about the small victories, and worked on building a plan for Sam's recovery. Sam was still struggling with the weight of his past, but there were glimmers of progress. He started attending group meetings, reaching out to others who had walked similar paths. It wasn't easy, and there were days when Sam relapsed, but John reminded him that it was okay to fall, as long as you kept getting back up. One evening, while they were sitting outside the shelter, Sam looked at John with a mixture of gratitude and humility. I don't know how you did it, man. I don't know how you turned your life around. But I'm starting to believe it's possible for me too. John smiled. It wasn't easy. It took time. But I never gave up. And you can't either. I'm not going to let you. Sam nodded, his eyes shining with a new sense of determination. I won't let you down. I'm going to keep fighting. John's heart swelled with pride. He knew that the road ahead would still be hard for Sam, but seeing his old friend begin to change, to believe in himself again, filled him with a renewed sense of hope. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about thriving, together. As John and Sam continued their journey, the shelter became a place not just for survival, but for building a community of people who cared for each other. They started organizing events, inviting others to join their journey of healing and growth. The small acts of kindness, the shared moments of struggle and triumph, became a foundation for a new sense of belonging. John knew that the road would always have its bumps, that life would continue to throw challenges his way. But he had learned that, with determination, support, and a sense of purpose, anything was possible. And as he looked at the people around him, Sam, his coworkers, the people at the shelter, he knew that he wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living, and he was helping others live too. It was on a quiet morning in early spring when John received an unexpected phone call that would change the course of his life once again. He was sitting at his kitchen table, sipping coffee, when his phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, but something compelled him to pick up. "Hello, this is John," he answered, his voice tentative. "Hi, John," the voice on the other end said. "This is Michael Peterson, with the nonprofit organization Hope for Change. We've been following your work at the shelter, and we're really impressed with everything you're doing. We believe you have the potential to make a real difference, and we'd like to offer you an opportunity to work with us full-time." John blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. "Wait, what do you mean? Work with you?" "We're looking for someone with your experience to help expand our outreach program," Michael continued. "We need someone who's been through the struggles and knows how to inspire others. We think you're the perfect fit." John's mind raced. This was the kind of opportunity he had never dreamed of. A chance to do even more, to reach more people, to change lives on a bigger scale. It was everything he had worked for. I don't know what to say," John stammered, still processing the offer. "Take your time," Michael said kindly. "We're not rushing you. But we believe this could be a game changer for you, and for the people you're helping." As John sat there, the weight of the decision settled on him. He had come so far, but this was the next step. It was time to step into the role he had been preparing for without even realizing it. And for the first time in a long time, John felt ready. "Okay," he said, his voice filled with newfound confidence. "I'm in. Let's do it." The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in his life, John was stepping into the future with a sense of purpose and excitement. And he knew that, no matter where it led, he was no longer walking alone. John's heart raced as he stepped into his new office at the Hope for Change organization. The walls were lined with motivational posters, and there were large windows that let in the warm sunlight, a stark contrast to the cold, dark streets he had known so well. It felt surreal to be sitting in an office, in a chair that was all his, in a building filled with people who truly believed in the mission of helping others. His role as the outreach coordinator was exactly what he had been working toward for years, but it was also more than he had ever imagined. This was his chance to make a difference on a much larger scale, to influence real change in the lives of people just like him, who had once been lost, hopeless, and forgotten. He wasn't alone in this new chapter. His team was small but dedicated. There was Rachel, the program manager, a woman with a kind heart and a fierce determination to make the world a better place. Then there was Lucas, a former client of the organization who had found his way out of homelessness and now worked as a case manager to help others do the same. Together, they were working toward a common goal, to provide support, resources, and hope to those who needed it the most. As John sat in his office on the first day, his thoughts turned to the people who had helped him along the way. There were moments when he doubted himself, moments when he wondered if he would ever be able to escape his past. But now he saw that everything had led him to this point. His pain, his struggles, and his triumphs had all been part of the process that had shaped him into the person he was today, a person capable of making a difference. That evening, John sat down with Rachel and Lucas for their first team meeting. The energy in the room was palpable, and there was a sense of excitement about the work they were about to do. John took a deep breath, feeling a bit of nervousness but also a sense of empowerment. He had learned to trust his instincts, and he knew that this was where he was meant to be. "We have a lot of work ahead of us," John began, looking around the room, "but I know that we're ready for it. We're here to help people who are at the lowest point of their lives, and we can show them that it's possible to rebuild, to change, and to find hope again. We're going to do that together." Rachel nodded. "Exactly. We've been through it ourselves, and that's what makes us uniquely qualified to do this. We know what it's like to feel like the world is against you, but we also know how it feels to stand up, to take that first step towards something better." Lucas added, "And we're not going to give up on anyone, not one person. We've all had help along the way, and it's time to pay it forward." John felt his heart swell with pride. These were the people he wanted by his side. Together, they could do incredible things. But it wasn't just about offering resources. It was about offering hope, about showing people that they were worth fighting for, that they deserved a future filled with possibility. Despite the excitement, the path ahead wasn't without challenges. John quickly learned that not everyone was on board with the organization's approach. There were skeptics, both inside and outside the organization, who doubted the effectiveness of their methods. Some believed that people who had been on the streets for years couldn't change, that they were too broken to be fixed. Others were frustrated with the slow progress and wanted faster, more dramatic results. One day, John received a call from a concerned board member, Mr. Gregory, who had been with the organization for years. "John, I'm glad to see you're so passionate about your work, but I have to ask, do you really think these people can change? I mean, how many times have they been given chances before?" John took a deep breath, knowing that this was the kind of question he would have to face repeatedly. He knew the struggles of the homeless were complex, that no solution was simple, but he also knew that every person who walked through their doors deserved a chance. "Mr. Gregory, I understand your concerns," John said, his voice steady, "but I've seen it with my own eyes. People can change. It's not always easy, and it doesn't happen overnight, but it's possible. We just have to give them the tools, the support, and the belief that they can do it. If we don't believe in them, who will?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. John could practically hear Mr. Gregory weighing his words, deciding whether or not to challenge him further. "You're passionate. I'll give you that," Mr. Gregory finally said. "But remember, this isn't just about good intentions. It's about results. I hope you can prove me wrong." The call ended, and John sat back in his chair, feeling the weight of the conversation. He knew that change wouldn't come easily, but he also knew that he couldn't give up on the people who had once been just like him, lost, forgotten, but worthy of a second chance. Over the following months, John and his team worked tirelessly to make a difference. They organized outreach programs, held support groups, and connected individuals to resources that would help them get back on their feet. It was a slow process, and there were times when it felt like they weren't making much progress. But every small victory kept them going. Whether it was a homeless individual getting their first job, someone finding housing after years of uncertainty, or even just a person sharing their story and finding the strength to take the next step. One day, after a particularly challenging week, John received a letter from a woman named Maria. She had been one of the first clients John had worked with when he joined Hope for Change. Maria had struggled with addiction and homelessness for years, but she had slowly started to turn her life around with the help of the organization. The letter read, "Dear John, I can't thank you enough for all you've done for me. I remember when I first walked into the shelter, feeling like I had nothing left. You looked me in the eye and told me that I was worth saving. That meant more than you'll ever know. Today, I have my own apartment. I've been sober for 6 months, and I'm back in school. I don't think I would have made it without your support. Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." John read the letter over and over, a lump forming in his throat. This was why he did the work he did. This was the kind of change he had hoped for when he started his journey, and it was real. In that moment, John realized that even though the road ahead would continue to be difficult, he was exactly where he was meant to be. The work he and his team were doing was changing lives, and as long as they kept pushing forward, There was no limit to the good they could accomplish. Just as things began to feel stable, John found himself facing new challenges. The demand for their services had increased, and the resources available were starting to stretch thin. They needed more funding, more volunteers, and more support from the community. John knew that in order to keep the momentum going, they needed to think bigger, to reach more people who could help. But with the growth of the organization came new difficulties. The board was putting pressure on him to deliver more visible results, and he had to find a way to balance the need for growth with the need to maintain the personal touch that made Hope for Change different from other organizations. John realized that in order to continue making a lasting impact, he couldn't do it alone. He began reaching out to local businesses, churches, and schools, asking for their help in supporting the organization's mission. To his surprise, many were eager to help, offering donations, volunteer hours, and resources. One evening, as John spoke at a local church about the importance of community support, he was met with a standing ovation. For the first time in a long while, he felt like the work they were doing was being recognized, and that the community was truly behind them. As the months went by, the organization continued to grow, and the results started to show. More and more individuals were successfully transitioning off the streets, finding work, and rebuilding their lives. The stigma surrounding homelessness began to shift as people saw the stories of transformation firsthand. John knew that the real challenge wasn't just about getting people off the streets. It was about changing the way society viewed them. But as Hope for Change grew, so did the understanding that homelessness wasn't a life sentence. It was a struggle, but it was one that could be overcome with the right support, compassion, and determination. As John sat in his office one afternoon, looking out at the busy streets below, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. It had been a long journey, full of challenges, setbacks, and triumphs. He had gone from a man with nothing to someone who was making a real difference. And in the process, he had found a purpose that gave his life meaning. But more than that, he had learned that no one was beyond hope. Not Sam, not Maria, and certainly not himself. Looking ahead, John knew that the work was far from finished. There would always be people in need, always more lives to touch. But he was ready. He had the strength, the team, and the passion to continue pushing forward. With the support of his community, his team, and the people who believed in the mission, John was confident that the future held even more opportunities to change lives and to show the world that no one, no matter their past, was beyond redemption. Years passed, and the organization continued to thrive. John had become a leader not just in his field but in his community, a symbol of what was possible when you didn't give up on people. And as he looked back on his journey, he realized that it wasn't just about changing the lives of others, it was about changing his own. One day, as he stood at the shelter's front door, greeting a new group of volunteers, he saw a familiar face walking down the street. It was Sam. This time, Sam wasn't lost. He wasn't struggling. He was smiling, holding a cup of coffee in his hand, looking at peace. "Hey, John," Sam called out, walking up to him. "I just wanted to thank you. I don't think I ever told you, but you really saved my life." John smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "You did the hard work, Sam. I just helped you see that you could." And for a moment, John felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that his journey had come full circle, that he had gone from asking for help to giving it, and in doing so, had found a way to give others the chance he had once been given. The future was bright, and it was just the beginning. The future looked promising, but John knew that true change required more than just helping individuals get back on their feet. It needed to be systemic, sustainable, and supported by the entire community. As he stood in the office of Hope for Change, looking at the plans for the next year, John understood that the real challenge was to create long-term solutions that would prevent people from falling back into homelessness once they had escaped it. Rachel and Lucas joined him in his office for their weekly brainstorming session. John had been thinking a lot about what would come next for the organization, especially with the increase in demand for their services. They had already made incredible strides, but they needed to do more. "I think it's time we expand our programs," John began. "We've helped people get housing, get jobs, and rebuild their lives. But what if we could prevent people from becoming homeless in the first place?" Rachel nodded, her eyes lighting up. "That's exactly what we need. We can offer financial literacy programs, job training, and even parenting classes. We can teach people the skills they need before they hit rock bottom. Lucas added, and we should strengthen partnerships with local businesses. If we can guarantee a job for someone who finishes a program, we'll give them not just hope, but a real future. The team was energized. John could see the vision unfolding, and it was bigger than he had ever imagined. It wasn't just about offering a safety net. It was about empowering people to stay out of the cycle of homelessness for good. John knew that no matter how strong their programs were, they couldn't do it alone. He had learned the power of community support in his own journey, and he was determined to forge deeper connections with local businesses, schools, and other nonprofits. It was time to take the organization's work beyond the walls of Hope for Change and into the heart of the city. He started by meeting with local business owners, explaining how investing in the community could help everyone. He shared success stories of people who had transitioned from homelessness to full-time jobs, showing that these individuals weren't just people to help, they were valuable, hardworking people who would contribute to the economy if given the chance. To his surprise, many business owners were eager to help. A local coffee shop offered internships for people graduating from the organization's barista training program. A construction company agreed to hire individuals who had completed the vocational training program. Even local schools offered their facilities for workshops and support groups. It was becoming clear. The community wanted to be a part of the solution. As the months passed, the ripple effect of Hope for Change's expanded programs became apparent. People were not only rebuilding their lives, but also giving back to the community in ways John had never imagined. They were mentoring others who were in the same position they had once been in, helping to guide them through the process of transformation. One day, John received a letter from a man named Tom, who had been homeless for several years before joining the program. In his letter, Tom wrote, "John, I wanted to let you know that I've been sober for a year now. I've got my own place, and I'm working full-time at a local hardware store. But the most important thing is that I found a sense of purpose. I'm now volunteering at the shelter every weekend, helping others who were once in my shoes. I can't tell you how much it means to me to give back. You and your team showed me that I wasn't a lost cause. Now I'm doing the same for others." John sat back in his chair, overwhelmed by the impact this simple letter had on him. The cycle of giving and receiving had come full circle. People who had been given a second chance were now giving second chances to others, and it was changing everything. Despite all the progress, there were days when John couldn't escape the nagging doubts that crept into his mind. The weight of the responsibility he carried sometimes felt unbearable. Was he doing enough? Was the work they were doing truly making a lasting impact? Would the organization be able to sustain itself in the long run? On one particularly difficult day, John sat in his office, staring at the stack of paperwork on his desk. The pressure of fundraising, meeting deadlines, and ensuring that each client received the care they needed seemed like too much to handle. He thought back to the early days of Hope for Change, when it had been just him and a few volunteers, when things felt simpler. Yet the stakes had never been higher. Just then, Rachel knocked on the door and walked in with a cup of coffee. "Hey, I thought you could use this," she said, setting the mug down in front of him. "I know it's been a crazy week, but we're making a difference. You've built something incredible here. Don't forget that." John smiled weakly and took the coffee. "I just keep wondering if I'm doing enough. There's so much more to be done, and I don't know if we can keep up with the demand." Rachel sat down across from him. "I get it, but remember, we didn't get here overnight. And you didn't do this alone. We've built something that's changing lives, John. That's what matters." Her words, simple yet true, brought John a sense of peace. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about doing the best they could every single day. The work would never be easy, but it was worth it. As the years went by, John continued to lead Hope for Change, watching it grow and evolve into something even more impactful than he had ever imagined. The organization became a model for other cities, proving that homelessness could be eradicated if the right resources, support, and determination were in place. John's role had shifted over time. He no longer worked directly with clients, but instead, he mentored the new leaders who had joined the team. His legacy was being built not just through the programs he had created, but through the countless lives that had been touched by the organization's work. One afternoon, as John walked through the shelter, now bustling with activity, he found himself reflecting on everything he had accomplished and everything still to come. He had come so far from the man who had once asked Donald Trump for a single dollar. And while he had received a shocking response then, it was the response he gave to the world now that mattered most. "I'm worth something," he had once told himself, and now he was showing others that they were worth something too. John stood at the doorway of the shelter, watching as the sun set on another busy day. The future was bright, and hope for change was just getting started. He smiled, knowing that he had helped to build a foundation that would last long after he was gone. This wasn't just about one man's story. It was about an entire community coming together to change lives for the better. And that, John realized, was the real miracle. Hope for Change had become more than just a shelter or a program. It was a movement. As John reflected on everything they had accomplished, he realized that the time had come to pass on the baton to a new generation. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the future of the community, the organization, and the people they had helped over the years. One evening, John sat down with Rachel and Lucas at the small cafe near the shelter, where they often gathered to brainstorm and reflect. The conversations had grown more focused lately. There was so much more to think about now that Hope for Change had become a beacon of hope for other cities as well. "I think we've reached a point where we need to scale," John said, taking a sip of his coffee. "We've done great work here in the city, but we've built something that can help people across the country." Lucas nodded in agreement. "We've been getting inquiries from other cities asking how they can start similar programs. We've created something that works, and it's clear that we can help others replicate it." Rachel leaned forward, her excitement palpable. "We've been talking about expanding for a while now, but the timing feels right. Let's take everything we've learned here, make it a model, and take it nationwide. We can build partnerships, offer resources, and help train other communities to tackle homelessness the way we have." John's heart swelled with pride. This could be the next step in the movement. It's time for Hope for Change to become a national organization, one that provides not just housing, but a comprehensive plan for lifting people out of homelessness for good. The decision to expand Hope for Change into a nationwide initiative wasn't an easy one. There were logistical challenges, financial hurdles, and the immense pressure of ensuring that the program's success didn't become diluted. But with Rachel and Lucas by his side, John felt confident that they could overcome anything. They began by working on a strategic plan to launch in multiple cities. The first step was to solidify the organization's core values and principles, ensuring that every new location would adhere to the same high standards of care, empowerment, and respect for the individuals they served. But the real challenge was finding the right people to help lead this expansion. It was no longer just about helping one person at a time. It was about impacting entire communities. Rachel took the lead on recruitment, traveling to various cities to meet with potential leaders who could help spearhead the initiative. Meanwhile, Lucas worked on building partnerships with local businesses, government agencies, and nonprofit organizations, ensuring that each new location had the support it needed to thrive. As the first few cities came on board, John couldn't help but marvel at how far they had come. Hope for Change was no longer just a local effort. It was becoming a beacon of hope for the entire nation. Even as Hope for Change gained national attention, the journey was far from easy. With expansion came new challenges: managing a larger team, securing funding, and maintaining the organization's core values while adapting to different cities and cultures. Each city had its own set of issues, and what worked in one location might not work in another. But John and his team had learned to be adaptable. They had built a strong foundation over the years, and they were determined not to let the organization lose its personal touch as it grew. John spent more time traveling, visiting the new locations, and meeting the individuals whose lives were being transformed. He found that seeing the change firsthand, hearing the stories of those who had been helped, and meeting the volunteers who were passionate about making a difference, recharged his spirit. One afternoon, as he visited a new facility in Denver, a young woman named Sophie approached him. She had been a recipient of Hope for Change's services just a year earlier and was now working as a case manager for the program. "Mr. Walker," Sophie said, shaking his hand, "I just wanted to thank you for giving me a chance. I came here with nothing, homeless, addicted, and hopeless. But through the program, I got my life back. Now I'm helping others do the same. I'm living proof that this works." John smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment he couldn't quite put into words. It was moments like this that made everything worthwhile. It wasn't just about the numbers or the headlines. It was about the people whose lives had been changed, the families that had been restored, and the future that had been reimagined. As the national expansion of hope for change continued to grow, John took time to reflect on the incredible journey that had brought him here. From the man who once stood on the street corner asking for $1 to the leader of a nationwide movement, his life had transformed in ways he never could have imagined. But it wasn't just his own journey that mattered. It was the journey of everyone who had been touched by the work of hope for change. Every person who had come through their doors, every volunteer who had given their time, and every business that had partnered with the organization had played a crucial role in creating the success they were experiencing now. John had built a legacy, not through grandiose achievements, but through the countless lives he had impacted, the hope he had sparked, and the community he had helped to build. As he sat in his office one evening, looking out at the bustling city, John realized that the journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. There were still millions of people to reach, millions of lives to change. But he wasn't doing it alone. With Rachel, Lucas, and the dedicated team behind him, he knew that the work would continue. They had built something powerful, and it would last far beyond any one person. As the sun set on another day, John smiled, knowing that he had not just survived, but thrived. And in doing so, he had helped countless others do the same. The future was bright, and hope for change would continue to shine as a guiding light for those in need. Years passed, and the impact of hope for change only grew stronger. The organization had touched thousands of lives, and its model was now being replicated in cities across the country. The fight to end homelessness was far from over, but the progress made was undeniable. John's role had shifted over the years, and eventually, he passed the leadership to Rachel, who had grown into a strong, compassionate leader in her own right. But he remained an active advocate for the cause, speaking at conferences, meeting with lawmakers, and continually pushing for more resources and support for those in need. Looking back, John could hardly believe how far they had come. What had started as one man's determination to turn his life around had evolved into a national movement, one that was rewriting the narrative of homelessness in America. And so, as Hope for Change continued its work, John found peace knowing that the legacy they had built together would carry on for generations to come. In the end, it wasn't about the money or the fame. It was about the lives that had been changed, the hope that had been restored, and the knowledge that, together, they had made a lasting difference in the world. As the story of Hope for Change continued to unfold, John knew one thing for certain. They had only just begun. The work ahead was vast, but the possibilities were endless. And with each new chapter, the hope of a better tomorrow would shine brighter than ever before. Hope for Change had achieved remarkable success in the U.S., but John's heart was filled with a deep desire to see the movement spread even further. He began to wonder how they could impact lives not only across the country but also on a global scale. There were so many countries where homelessness was an unspoken epidemic, where people lived in despair without the opportunities for rehabilitation and support that Hope for Change had created. John sat down one evening with Rachel, Lucas, and a few key members of their leadership team to discuss the next steps. The room was filled with energy, each person excited by the idea of expanding the mission beyond national borders. "I've been thinking a lot about this," John began, looking around at the team. "Our work here has been incredible, but I want to know, how can we scale this globally? There are countries where homelessness is devastating, and we have the tools, the knowledge, and the passion to help." Rachel, who had become a seasoned leader, spoke first. "It's an ambitious idea, John, but it's possible. We've proven that our approach works, and with the right partnerships, we could help other countries implement similar programs." Lucas added, "We already have networks in some parts of Europe, Africa, and Asia. We could start by working with local organizations that share our vision, train them, and adapt our model to their needs." The discussion that evening sparked a new vision for Hope for Change. It wasn't just about saving one city or one state. It was about creating a global movement, a movement that could empower people, give them opportunities, and show them that they are not defined by their circumstances, no matter where they live. As the idea of global expansion took shape, Hope for Change began to form partnerships with international organizations, humanitarian groups, and local governments. The first major international collaboration began in a region that had long struggled with poverty and homelessness, South America. Hope for Change worked closely with local nonprofits to establish training programs, provide shelters, and create sustainable employment initiatives in countries like Brazil and Argentina. They started with small pilot programs, focusing on providing housing and job skills to people who had nowhere to turn. The response was overwhelming. People who had once been invisible in their communities were suddenly receiving the help they needed. In one case, a man named Eduardo, who had lived on the streets of Rio de Janeiro for years, was able to complete a training program and secure a job at a local restaurant. He later wrote a letter to the team that read, "I never thought I would have a second chance, but thanks to you, I have hope again. I've found work, and more importantly, I found my dignity. I know I'm not alone anymore. Thank you for showing me that I matter." Stories like Eduardo's were becoming more common as the programs expanded into other regions. And as they continued to scale, they learned to adapt their approach to different cultural and social contexts, ensuring that each new initiative reflected the values of the local community while still staying true to the core principles of Hope for Change. As Hope for Change extended its reach globally, it was met with both triumphs and challenges. In some countries, the need for their services was immediate, and the demand for help was overwhelming. However, there were also cultural barriers to overcome, especially in regions where mental health and addiction were still stigmatized. In India, where Hope for Change had started a pilot program in a major city, the team encountered significant resistance. Many people who were homeless were viewed with suspicion, and mental health issues were often ignored or misunderstood. "We need to shift the perception of homelessness," John said during a team meeting in New Delhi. "We need to make people understand that these are real people who need help, not just a societal problem to sweep under the rug." Rachel and Lucas worked tirelessly with local leaders to create awareness campaigns, educate communities about the causes of homelessness, and build relationships with local hospitals and clinics to provide the necessary health care. Slowly, attitudes began to change, and people were more willing to seek help. The challenges were many, but the victories felt even sweeter. As the global programs grew, John could feel the impact of their work multiplying across continents. It was no longer just a national movement, it was a worldwide force for change. As Hope for Change expanded, John began to see the power of collective action on a global scale. From North America to South America, from Europe to Asia, people were coming together to tackle homelessness in a way they never had before. Volunteers, donors, and organizations from all over the world were contributing their time and resources to the cause. John's leadership had inspired a movement, but it was the community of like-minded individuals who were carrying it forward. From the small village in Africa to the crowded streets of New York, people were working side by side to create lasting change. One day, as John attended an international conference on homelessness in London, he was approached by a woman named Anna, who had been involved in one of the first Hope for Change programs in Portugal. "John, I just wanted to thank you," Anna said, her eyes filled with emotion. "Your organization changed my life. But more than that, it has changed the lives of so many others here in Lisbon. We now have a network of support for people who were once forgotten. It's all because of what you started." John smiled and placed his hand on her shoulder. "You've taken it further than I ever could. It's the work of people like you that keeps this movement alive. Together, we've created something that will last." It was moments like these that reaffirmed John's belief that collective action was the key to real, lasting change. Homelessness was a global issue, but it was also a shared responsibility. As John sat at his desk one evening, reflecting on the past, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. The organization he had founded with nothing more than a desire to help had become a global force for change. Hope for Change had transformed not only his life but the lives of millions of people around the world. But even more importantly, the movement had shifted the way people viewed homelessness. It wasn't just a problem for governments or charities to solve. It was a collective responsibility, one that required empathy, understanding, and action from everyone in society. The future was bright. The organization's work wasn't finished, but John knew that the foundation they had built would last for generations. He smiled as he looked at the map of Hope for Change's global presence, each pin representing a city, a community, and a life that had been touched. He closed his eyes and thought of the thousands of people who had found hope, dignity, and purpose through the organization's programs. And for the first time in a long while, he felt peace, knowing that his work was far from over, but that it had already made a lasting impact. The journey that had begun with one man asking for $1 had grown into a movement that was changing the world, one life at a time. And with that, John knew that hope for change would continue to shine its light on those who needed it most, for many years to come.